evening, and thank you for joining in on this special broadcast that we are bringing to you. The special broadcast on the U.S. presidential elections. It's finally the election day, though I must tell you, I really don't know how to phrase this, considering that about 100 million people have already cast their vote. And now the rest are turning up for physical voting. So in a lot of ways, voting has been underway in United States for a while now. It culminates now, barring a couple of states where they have actually given them the little bit of grace period to send in their mail-in votes for another 10 days. But that's U.S. elections for you, U.S. presidential elections for you. They're more complicated than any other format that we know. And that's why tonight we've decided to bring to you your guide to the U.S. presidential elections. Now, let me also tell you that it is going down to the wire. Let me also tell you that while many pollsters are predicting a narrow lead for the Democrats and Joe Biden, a lot of that could change if you look at the kind of turnout we are looking at right now across the polling stations in the parts where polling has begun. In the eastern side, a lot more Republicans are expected to physically turn up, while the Democrats may have chosen the mail-in format to cast their vote. And so it's very, very difficult really right now to predict which way it's going to go. But here are some of the things that I am really going to focus on tonight as we decode this entire election process for you. Point number one is going to be, what's the biggest conversation point tonight? Why are there fears of unrest? Why are shops and businesses and even key official buildings being boarded up? What's causing this fear of possible violence and civil unrest post the counting in United States? I also want to talk about what the pollsters are predicting. Why are they saying that basis what feedback? And then we will come to what is always a key talking point, the key swing states in United States. Unlike other places, unlike our country, in United States, all states don't really become the focus. There are a handful of states that are usually the ones who keep the suspense going till the last minute, can swing from one side to the other, from Republican to Democrat to back to Republican. And those are the ones that even this time we will be looking at. Which are those swing states this time around? What weightage will they have on the final number is what we're going to be talking about. Then we will also speak to you about the entire election process. What are caucuses? What is electoral college? How different is the U.S. presidential election from what we witness in our own country when we choose our government and thereby the prime minister in our country? And of course, the most important point for what should really matter to you and me, apart from our general interest in global news and world politics, is which president is better suited for India, for our perspective. Some of the things that we will talk about, I've got a power-packed panel together. Their experience is the best that we have out there right now. So let's say good evening to our managing editor, Vinay Tiwari, joining me in our studios right now. Smita Sharma, senior journalist, always a pleasure to have her on our shows. Shubhajit Roy, associate editor for Indian Express. Good evening to you, Shubhajit. Mr. Chidanand Rajghatta, foreign editor for Times of India. Great to have you back on this panel. And Pramit Pal Chaudhary, foreign editor for Hindustan Times. Good to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Vinay and I have had a lot of conversations in the last couple of days, but I do want to come back to you on that, Vinay. The fact that while usually the excitement is about who gets the White House, this time there are many layers and steps and levels before that. And one of them possibly could be unrest on the streets of US. Now, just for our viewers to explain, why is that happening?
You have a fantastic panel right now, and they understand foreign policy much better than I do. But I can tell you something. We've been in the middle of a hurly-burly of Bihar elections, and I dare say that our elections are 10 times smoother than they are heading towards. And that's not something that we would have said otherwise. Remember, it's the state of Bihar going to elections, and I'm comparing that with the United States. For once, the United States looking messier than even Bihar. But yes, since you spoke about unrest, I think there is a widespread belief now, more than one people have now said so, that in a situation where there is a bit of a deadlock or it's a tight contest, you may have situations where mobs might just roam the streets. People are being asked to stock up. There are boards being nailed into superstores. Weapon sales seems to have gone up, and you have a president who seems to be openly supporting some of that. So you really have a situation where there are three different levels of fights. One is, of course, the electoral fight, for which the outcome we would hopefully know soon. And then there is one legal fight that both sides are preparing for, with an army of lawyers being lined up by both the Democrats and the Republicans. And then the street fight that they are preparing for. The National Guard seems to be on alert, and most of the police forces and even the social media giants have seemed to have gotten into it, where they've started cautioning people on it. So it's probably the most unusual thing that I've seen ever. And if this is what they're heading towards, I must say that our elections are possibly way more smoother, because this kind of mass unrest is not something that we've ever feared. I mean, despite as intense a politics as possibly the United States has.
Yes, and a lot of it, of course, has to do with the fact that the American voters and their society has been deeply divided, not just in this election, but for the last several years now, even before the last round of election for Donald Trump, and that's just become worse. Add to that perhaps a longer time to figure out who's going to be winning this election, the fact that votes will have to be counted for those that have been mailed across, and the most important point, Mr. Chidanand Rajghatta, when I heard President Trump say that very bad things can happen, and those bad things can lead to very, very bad things. That was a very concerning comment, to hear from the President of United States of America. I mean, in a way, he himself is saying that expect violence if the results don't go in a certain way.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's so eloquent, isn't he? Bad things can happen. Yeah, I mean, he is the prophet of doom. He evokes this incredible imagery of violence and mayhem all the time, ascribing it typically to so-called Antifa and other elements. And there is clearly a racial undertone to this. I mean, it's no secret at all. He describes his own support base, largely consisting of many of these racist groups as good people. So yes, I mean people have been forewarned, and I think part of the effort also is to scare people into submission and prepare grounds for challenging the counting of mail-in ballots. So roughly, I think by now everyone knows that a large number of Democrats have opted for absentee voting or mail-in ballots, dropping off ballots because of the fear of pandemic. They don't want to stand in lines on election day. And a large number of Republicans have preferred to vote in person. I think it also will create a sort of spectacle of a red wave that he hopes will happen today. So expect to see a lot of red at the polling booths today. So he's prepared the ground. Fundamentally, all this boils down to, since you're talking of swing states, I'll just point it out. Everyone is looking at Florida. The reason for this is Florida, the polls close at 7 p.m., which is 5:30 a.m. India time. And if and Florida has always been a sort of really 50-50 state where, they go either Democrat or Republican by very narrow 1% margin on either side. So in Florida, when polls close at 7 p.m., if the early projections suggest that Biden is winning, then it closes a lot of doors for Trump. And in Florida, they will announce results fairly early because over the years, because there's a lot of senior citizens in Florida, they count their votes quickly. They're well prepared. And that's one of the amazing things about this country. Some states are well prepared to count early, count quickly, and get projections, if not results, out quickly. Some states are totally unprepared for that. But in Florida, there are two demographics which will tell you, these are the early tea leaves. So the two demographics, one is the senior citizens. Florida is a warm, sunny state, so a lot of seniors move there to live there. And the sense that seniors who supported Trump last time, if they have moved to Biden in large numbers, they will put Biden over the top. And the other big constituency is the Latino constituency. Florida has a lot of Hispanic population. It's a very fractured Hispanic population because Cuban Americans and Latinos from the so-called socialist countries like Venezuela or Cuba, they tend to support Republicans. They're suspicious of Democrats and their socialist credentials, or Trump calls them the socialist front. Then there are also Latinos from Puerto Rico and also a lot of Caribbean population which tend to support Democrat. So depending on how these two constituencies vote, and if they are moved in big numbers to Biden, and if they put Biden over the top in Florida, and Florida has 29 electoral votes, remember Biden has already locked in about 200 electoral votes from really Democrat strongholds like California, New York, etc. So if he adds this 29 to his 200 or 210 plus, he's almost within striking distance of 279. So Florida, everyone will be looking at Florida. The moment polls close, everyone will look at Florida. And then a couple of other sunshine states. Also, there's Georgia, which has historically been a very strong Republican state, but where there's been a huge growth in population of blacks. I mean, the city and suburbs of Atlanta itself can overturn the votes of the rest of the white population in Georgia, and the lines have been really long in Georgia. People have voted for 6-8 hours to vote in Georgia, and if the sort of black turnout in Georgia is huge, and if they overturn the whites of Georgia, who historically tend to to Republicans, these two states can just decide the election straight away.
Okay.
But if these two states are narrow, or if Trump wins, then you know that the whole election, the shift will be towards the so-called rust states, which is Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, which is what Trump won and which put him into the White House this thing. And everyone will look at those states, and that counting could take forever. And that is where Trump and his campaign hopes to shut down the counting of mail-in votes, and we'll be in for a long night, or for that matter, many days.
Okay, that's an interesting point that you made about shutting down the counting for mail-in votes. And that brings me back to the point of whether we would even know the result, say in the next 24 hours, or it could take several days, or do we wait for one side to concede or one side to simply announce the victory? What could be the possibilities? Pramit Pal Chaudhary, if I can just bring that question to you, for our viewers to understand that this time it may not be as simple.
Yes, each state in America has its own rules and regulations about how to handle ballots, how to disqualify votes, and even its own separate deadlines, if you wish, for when they would stop counting ballots. So that's one of the reasons why you have all of these potential legal battles pending. So Pennsylvania, for example, has said that they will continue to count ballots, mail ballots, for example, that continue to have if they have this postmark of election day or any date before that, all the way until Friday. For 3 days, they will keep counting them. Some other states basically say that after election day midnight, we're just not going to stop taking. We'll just stop taking any more, counting any more ballots. Others have sort of variations, if you wish, on that theme. So in each state, you have a slightly different way of handling this. Trump, as you mentioned, the Democrats have largely opted for postal ballots, and there's an assumption that there'll be a much larger Republican turnout for in-person election voting. So Trump has basically signaled that, the Republican Party has signaled that in some places, so what you're seeing, what they expect to see in a number of these states is that in the initial counting, where you tend to count the in-person voting first, you'll see a surge of Republican support. And then a wave of Democrats votes coming in later as the postal ballots and these come in are counted later on. Their game would be to effectively declare that we've already won halfway through, because obviously the first wave of numbers will look like it's Republican, and then claim that everything else is that comes after is fraudulent. So they'll be looking for mistakes, if you wish, in the processing of the votes, some legal weaknesses that they can then try to go to the court and try to get votes disqualified or the voting process stopped. And Trump has indicated he's fully supportive of this, which is what is relatively unusual. Obviously, most presidents don't do that. Hence the large number of lawyers. Now, all of this comes into play only if it's a very close election. If it's a landslide, for example, for Biden, it'll be pretty difficult for Trump to put up enough legal battles to overturn an election. But if there are it is a close vote, it is a close vote in certain states, then yes, then a legal battle is the way. And as we all know, the Supreme Court, where a lot of it would eventually end up, is effectively loaded in favor of the Republicans, because the conservatives, thanks to a large number of appointments under the Trump administration, has a right-wing supermajority of about 6-3. So that's one of the reasons they want to push much of this as they can to the Supreme Court, as happened in the controversial Florida vote in 2002,
Right.
between George W. Bush and Al Gore, in which a fight over 61,000 ballots ended up eventually in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court eventually in favor of Bush. The game would be, if we have similar kinds of close fights in a number of key battleground states, to have, let's say, 6 or 7 such legal battles across the United States, and you could swing a fairly large number of electoral college votes in a certain direction. But again, that only applies, I would argue, if there is a very close election. In a landslide, it'll be very difficult for Trump or anybody to be able to turn that around just through legal ways.
Okay, since you brought up the aspect about electoral college, I just want to quickly take our viewers through what that really means, because unlike what people may think, the U.S. voters aren't really directly simply choosing their president. Collectively, what each state sees as a majority, that's where the vote really goes. In addition to that, it's the vote of the Senate and the House of Representatives that's also counted. And together, that electoral votes that each state has can really change the entire dynamics of the election. So it's not as simple to say that, okay, if there are 1 million people and they have voted in such a, 50 for this side and 50 for that side, that's how the results are going to pan out. The weightage for some of the states is much higher than for some of the other states, and that's where the complications really begin. Now, because we've been talking about swing states, Smita, if I can come to you, some of the states have been mentioned here, the usual suspects. There's Florida, this time around there's Georgia, that's otherwise considered a Republican stronghold. There is Ohio, North Carolina, and they all have different number of electoral votes. So at the end of the day, for a viewer to understand, what should we be watching out for?
Hi, good evening, Tanvi. Good to see, of course, all the familiar faces and friends here on the panel. Pramit and Chidanand already spoke there about a lot of these states, Let me just say that, it will depend a lot on who comes out with significant leads in the electoral college counting. So say if George Biden actually manages to get past 270, which is the clincher of the 538 electoral college votes, without getting in a Pennsylvania in his pocket, then perhaps there will be lesser room for drama. It will, and of course the states of, the Michigan that we are talking about yesterday, we saw Donald Trump hold 2 of the 5 rallies that he did in Michigan itself, because these are the states where the numbers, he was able to flip these states. The Clinton, in fact, the blue-leaning states or the traditionally Democratic states in the industrial Midwest, that Clinton was able, in a surprise move in that black swan event that the world witnessed in 2016, where he flipped them for himself. So these are the states where, of course, it's going to be a crucial game changer. I was just looking at the poll figures, which, of course, consistently the national poll figures which were giving Biden a lead of almost 10 to 11%, has now reduced to almost 7 to 8%. There is this website called S Markets, which actually is into sports betting and into poll predictions. As per the betting market, they are looking at a 315 electoral college number for Joe Biden. And interestingly, they're also betting a 42% chance that Donald Trump will not concede defeat, even if the numbers are clear, that he would still opt for some sort of a legal battle or a mess. I
Right.
mean, Vinay, at the start of the show, referred to the Bihar elections. Right now, Donald Trump's strategy may well as be said to be jiski lathi uska bhain. So he's really willing to go out there and play that lathi, because that's been his messaging, Tanvi. The first question that you put there about this feeling of unrest, this apprehension about violence. I mean, in 2016, both Shubhajit and me were covering the elections there on the ground. And I remember when the election results came in, Times Square went absolutely silent. And later in the night, of course, when Hillary Clinton conceded defeat, when Donald Trump made that acceptance speech, we saw a lot of street fights sort of happen across New York, and then news started pouring in of demonstrations and protests. But having said that, in the last 4 years, and particularly in the last year itself, ever since the COVID mismanagement has become the key issue, and this election is in a way the referendum of Trump and his handling of the COVID disaster, the messaging has been one about fear. The messaging has constantly been about dark things. It's not been about a positive agenda. It's not even about make America great again anymore. As journalists, we subscribe to these campaign pamphlets, and many a mornings the late night, in fact, pamphlets that come in, say, from the Trump camp, when I wake up early in the morning, 5 o'clock, and I see the emails, the subject liners are a horror to read, because most of them are so dark, grim, and constantly talking about violence in some form or the other, talking about rioting, trying to completely, take away any sort of credibility or legitimacy from the Black Lives Matter movement or the racial injustice protests. So it's been his Richard Nixon moment of trying to play that law and order card, which is why even in these swing states that we are talking about, I mean, obviously Wisconsin, Michigan, these are going to be the crucial states. Pennsylvania with its 20 electoral college votes, but we'll have to see whether Donald Trump really is in a mood to accept defeat if he loses. We still don't know. 2016, 139 million votes were cast, Tanvi. This time we've already had 71% of that cast in through early votes.
Yes, and that's a very interesting statistic, personally for me, to see how voting is being done in this in this era that we are living in right now. But Shubhajit, do you agree with Smita that there is a possibility that Donald Trump may just stand up and say, I am not going to accept this? How real is the possibility of unrest? The American media seems to be reporting constantly now how the gun sales have shot through the roof.
Well, the possibility is very real, as Smita pointed out, that, like the 1968 elections where Richard Nixon invoked race and law and order as one of the key themes. Just like that, in 2020, you would imagine the world has changed, but Donald Trump has re-invoked the same theme of law and order, and race has been one of the racial tension has been one of his key themes. The fear of the mob, that has been another key theme. So they actually lead to a real possibility of violence on the streets if there is a razor thin margin. And Trump has been putting together a battery of lawyers, a legal team to challenge some of these results in some of the key battleground states. He would, if he sees that he's losing or his margins are low, then he would definitely challenge, and his campaign has made it very clear that they would call for election fraud. But having said that, there are only, as 538, the famous election website, it said that the difference between a nail biter and a landslide is really slim. So in 12 hours from now, maybe you would have a landslide if in either candidate's favor. If Texas and Florida go in favor of any of these one candidate, I think the game would be done. But I mean, as all the previous panelists pointed out, the states of Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, which is being said to be the tipping state in this particular election, especially. So these are the. I mean, I think viewers have to keep patience and wait out for the elections. I cannot emphasize the fact that a winner is declared only after all the votes are counted. So that is, I think, we need to keep in mind when we watch the elections.
Well, between Bihar elections and the way they may just turn out by the end of this week for us and the US elections winner, you and I are going to have an extremely busy time right up till Diwali, that's for sure. Hopefully, there won't be any unrest in any part of the world, be it in our country or in United States. But if I can just go back to Mr. Chidanand Rajghatta on one more aspect that I wanted to check with him. Mr. Rajghatta, a lot of the polls that I was reading about, how it's been so far, are giving a lead to Joe Biden, albeit a very narrow lead, but a lead. Just how seriously should we be taking these pollsters right now, keeping in mind that many of them got it horribly wrong the last time around?
Actually, they did not get it wrong last time around. Remember, last time the poll prediction was that Hillary Clinton would win, was leading by about 2 to 3% nationwide. And in terms of the popular vote, that's exactly what happened. Hillary Clinton won by 2.86 million votes.
Correct.
What happened last time was the pollsters did not, focus sufficiently on the so-called battleground states. And by now, I guess all your viewers also know that the U.S. elections are not decided by the popular vote nationwide, but by state votes. This time, those state-by-state polls, the pollsters have said that they have corrected their methodology. The one important correction or one important mistake they made last time was underweighting the so-called Trump voter, the rural voters, the white, non-college educated voter. They say that they have corrected for that. And if they have corrected for that, and now even the battleground states are showing, up to 5% or 6% lead for Biden. Nationwide, Biden's lead is 10 to 11%, which means it's likely he'll win the popular vote all across America by something like anywhere from 5 to 8 million votes instead of 3 million votes last time. But in swing states and battleground states, if they say Biden is leading by 5 to 6% votes, and that they have corrected the methodology of the last time and given adequate weightage to the so-called, rural, white, non-college educated voter, then this is a bad sign for Trump, which is why, the sense is they're trying to shut down voting by mail-in, which are mainly, which is what Democrats are tending to do. So I think the polls are fairly accurate. The one big thing, the one mystery which nobody knows, and we'll probably get a sense, early in the evening after polls close, is there a hidden, the so-called shy Trump voter? And this is not just the shy Trump voter or Trump voters who voted last time, who gave him 60 million votes compared to 63 million for Hillary Clinton, but shy Trump voters who did not vote last time. There is still, I remember the turnout is still only about 50-60%. So there's still, a lot more votes of people who did not vote at all. First time Trump voters. And this is hard to fathom because, I've looked at some of the rallies, Trump rallies. I can tell you that the enthusiasm is unmatched, right? Nothing that the Democrats did, also because of the structure of the rally itself. Trump, couldn't care less about COVID or people dying from it. So he had this, crazy in-person rallies full of, raucous, supporters. And that shows incredible enthusiasm. But is it the same old Trump voters who were there last time, or the new Trump voters who have come in? And if there are new Trump voters, is it in sufficiently large numbers that it can overcome this 5% deficit in battleground states? That is a big question. Visually today, we'll know actually at the polling stations, you can see a sort of red wave. But how big the red wave is, whether there is a so-called silent majority that Trump has sort of managed to enthuse. That's something nobody knows. We'll probably get a sense in exit polls or early, trends. But like I said, there are two sets of state which we have to watch out for. One is the so-called Sun Belt, Florida, Arizona, Nevada. If these states go for Biden, then it literally shuts the door on Trump. But if these states, Trump manages to hang in, particularly in Florida, then the whole attention shifts to the so-called Rust Belt states, which is basically Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. These are the three states, remember, that Trump flipped last time, and these are the states that put him into the White House, even though he lost the popular vote.
Yes.
And these are the three states where also counting is going to be, slow and delayed because they're not as well prepared as Florida, like I said, Florida was. So that is why the Republicans are so desperate to shut down counting, once, polls close.
It amazes me why, after all this while, in the year 2020, with all the kinds of technology and resources that America has at its disposal, some of their systems are still so archaic when it comes to elections.
Well, I can tell you this, Tanvi, that in the year 2000, during the Bush-Gore fiasco, if you remember, year 2000, I actually said, I wrote a piece saying the United States should just outsource their election to India. I mean, come on, so they outsource so many things. Why not outsource the elections?
Yeah, I think our election commission can definitely teach them a handful of things. But the point, and why I raised this question, Mr. Rajghatta, was exactly this, that while a viewer may see these polls that are being put out and assume that Joe Biden seems to be winning, the popular vote isn't just it. And beyond that, a lot could happen that put Donald Trump in the White House the last time around, that put George Bush in the White House earlier this century as well. So those things can happen, and that's why it boils down to these specific states. One of them being Florida, that has about 29 electoral votes, North Carolina 15, Michigan 16, Pennsylvania 20. So these are the big chunks that can actually take election one way or the other. Now, that being said, Pramit Pal Chaudhary, would you like to comment on this as well? To your mind, amongst these states, which could hold key to Donald Trump's victory?
Or any and all of them, but as has been mentioned, Florida and Texas are the two battleground states which have by far the largest number of electoral college votes. Texas is the second largest state. Florida is the fourth largest. If Trump was to lose either one of them, then his chances to become the president would almost be completely wiped out. He would have to win almost everything else to win. But neither of those states are considered are Democratic states. I mean, they're not considered part of the traditional Democratic. Though Florida is 50-50, but they're not considered part of Biden's ledger, if you wish. Biden is coming in with the assumption that the 232 electoral college votes that Hillary Clinton won are already in the bag. So all he has to do is get 38 more. So he has more options, if you wish, among the almost dozen battleground states that exist. So Texas and Florida are the two biggest. You've mentioned North Carolina, Georgia, two southern states, traditionally Republican, which are now in play. And so if both of them or one of them were to go to Biden, that would definitely be a major boost for him. Others have mentioned Arizona and Nevada in the West. Arizona in particular is a state that's been rising in terms of population and is now again in play, if you wish, a traditional Republican state. Then, of course, Ohio, Pennsylvania. But I would say that Biden's real strength lies in the fact that I would see Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, the upper Midwest, the three big upper Midwestern states, I would say are in his bag already because his leads there are quite enormous. I mean, Michigan is well over double digits, for example, and I don't see how it will be possible for Trump to get that. The polls, I doubt, will be that incorrect. So if those three states, for example, are already in Biden's bag, he's very close to 270 at this point. At that point, he needs only one or two of the other states, and it doesn't really matter which of them. Forget Texas and Florida. One or two of the other states for him to be able to get through. Ohio, I view unlikely. That's one state where Trump's lead is relatively solid. Pennsylvania is definitely the one everybody's looking at. It's got a fair number of electoral college votes. And one of the interesting things about Pennsylvania is that if you look at, Chidanand mentioned the issue of people, the non-voters, and question of turnout. Pennsylvania has about 13 million people. But in 2016, 2.4 million of them didn't bother to vote, people who were eligible to vote. And about half of those
Right.
were non-college educated whites. So if they were to come out all in force, then Pennsylvania is Trump. But if the non-voters on the other side, blacks, minorities, college-educated whites, were to come out and vote in favor of Biden, Pennsylvania could easily swing the other direction. So these are the kind of unknown knowns that basically are why everybody's not very clear. But I would say advantage Biden because, as I said, my view is the Upper Midwest is already in his hands. It's really going to be just a couple of other medium-sized states that will be enough to push him through.
Okay, and well, let's hope that we get clarity sooner than later, but one never knows. I'm going to request all of you to just stay on with me because I just want to quickly go across to Natalie Jennings, editor of The Fix of the Washington Post, who's joining us right now live from Washington, D.C. Good morning to you, Natalie. Thank you so much for being with us here on Mirror Now. Just a quick update from you on how the first few hours of voting on the final day are looking right now.
Hey, thank you for having me. We are seeing long lines at polling places across the country, some issues at various polling places and reports of things, but it's important to remember that that's normal on election days to hear about technical issues. Of course, Americans are on high alert for any type of interference, anything that would look nefarious with regards to messing with the vote this year. There's a lot of people who are very concerned on that. But it's still really early. The East Coast polls opened about 3 or 4 hours ago. West Coast polls are just opening now. So it's a little bit early to assess turnout or really the overall smoothness of how things are going.
And what is the expectation within your own organization, Natalie, of when you guys hope to have any clarity on who the next U.S. president could be?
We are looking at a lot of different scenarios. I think everyone wants to set the expectation for readers and viewers that this could be a days or weeks long process, but there is a scenario where we know something tonight. Your last guest was talking about the importance of Florida. And one reason that it's important, other than that it is a really huge state that turns in a big share of the electorate, is that it is one state that counts votes that have come in early. And we should know a lot about that result tonight. Some of the other important states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, those upper Midwest states, don't start counting the votes until today. So Florida, we expect to hear about that relatively early, and that will shape the conversation and will tell us a lot about whether President Trump has a chance to win the presidency. And I agree that if it is not looking good for him, then maybe we won't know the final results, but we'll know how things are going.
Okay, and just for our viewers here to understand how voting is being held in times of a pandemic, a large percentage of votes, I understand, have already been mailed across via postal ballot. On ground, those who've chosen to physically go and vote, are there any different options, physical, electronic? What's the mode being used?
Today is the day when people can go and do sort of the traditional, either some places do electronic, some places do written. You can walk up and hand in a mail-in ballot in some places. So we're seeing those voters show up today. We have already seen really high turnout in the other methods of voting. So 70% of the people who voted in 2016, 70% of that total had voted before Election Day today, which is really something that is remarkable. We're on pace to shatter records for the share of people who have voted in this country. But we'll be looking to see how big turnout is on the day today. Of course, many people are concerned about showing up in person because of the virus, which is spiking here in the United States.
Yes, well, as we speak to you, we also have, elections going across India and various parts as well, and similar concerns lie there. Very quickly, Natalie, before we let you go, a quick update on the fears of unrest and if security has been stepped up significantly, if there's, any update or any reports of any untoward incident right now.
Security is sort of heightened right now. I think mostly we expect to what people were preparing for was what's going to happen tonight after the polls close and in the days and weeks that follow. Because remember, we won't know results. So perhaps people who are bad actors, people who are worried, the ones that people are worried about, they won't potentially have much to react to tonight. So even if all goes smoothly tonight and it's a quiet night, I don't know that, fears are going to be really quelled for some days or weeks until this is really resolved.
Natalie Jennings, thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking to us. I'm sure you have a busy day ahead. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, let me take that point and back to our panelists as well. And one thing that I wanted to come to you about is also for our viewers to understand that this election isn't just about one day. In fact, it starts in the United States. It starts several months at the beginning of this year. And from there on, it then comes to this final day. If you can help our viewers understand how it works, right, from the primaries and the caucus.
Well, yes. If this wasn't all complicated enough, I think we'll make our viewers a little more, confused about this. Well, they have a very different system where they have caucuses which are, organized by the parties where they choose their own representative. And then there are these primaries which are essentially done by the local governments or the municipal authorities. And then they have a third process, which is called the conventions, which the Democrats hold their convention where they're supposed to finally decide who their presidential candidate is going to be. And the same thing is done by the Republicans as well. Well, on the face of it, it looks a very, organized democratic process of choosing who's going to represent you. But as you know, the whole process, if you start from A and end at Z, which we don't know when it will end in this case, it can be incredibly complicated. And remember that for all the modernity that the United States symbolizes here, at least in India, it's a very archaic, as you said, system in which they follow. You'll be surprised that I don't know how many Indians know this, that they possibly do not even have an election commission. In fact, they do not even sometimes, many states do not even insist on an ID card. You can simply just match your signatures and you're allowed to vote. And imagine something like that happening here. They would never ever get a result because everybody would be accused of just simple booth capturing.
Right.
But they do follow that system, and it can be incredibly complicated. And that's why you will see that most people don't quite get why the results are not being announced. In fact, I remember 4 years ago, I'm sure Smita and Shubhajit both remember that, there was one particular election, I think 2008, where or 2012, where Obama went into the box and didn't come out for the next 30 minutes, and people were wondering what happened. And then they realized that along with the elections, they also do referendums for various local issues.
Yes.
And it takes that long to actually circle those, with a pencil. So it's just very, very complicated. So yes, they have this 4-try structure, which finally decides who is going to be. And yes, sorry, one other thing I wanted to add here, that the electoral college system on paper actually makes the electoral college then take a decision on the president. So technically they can go against the pledge. There have been instances where even though a Democrat is pledged to vote for the Democrat candidate, there have been instances where a Democrat has gone against that pledge and voted for somebody else, which they call a zero vote or whatever they call it. But that can also become complicated, where some people can actually just switch sides and not vote for their own candidate.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Just trying to simplify and decode it for all of our viewers. Shubhajit, let's get to the last aspect of this conversation, and I want all of you experts to come in on that. How will it impact India, or rather, who is going to be a better president, who can be a better president as far as we are concerned?
So that's a very interesting question, and I would just analyze it in a manner where you would get the sense that there are no, 4 people who are completely different in attitude and personality as Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, and President Trump. But if there is one thing all 4 have agreed is their relationship to India. I think whichever way the election outcome goes, whether it's Joe Biden or President Trump being re-elected, the India relationship will be sort of high on agenda. And from India's perspective, it's been on an upward trajectory in the last 2 decades. I think it's an irreversible relationship, especially because with the rise of China and the belligerence that we are seeing along our border, I think we'll see a common ground on in strategic terms, as well as in defense and economic and other terms. So I think from India's perspective, any candidate winning, it doesn't matter. What matters is that the trajectory of the relationship, both sides have to invest in the relationship over the next 4 years.
Okay, Smita, would you want to come in on this?
Well, it's a question that will require a longer time period to answer, but I'm sure you're close to wrapping up the show now. I would broadly agree with Shubhajit, except for the fact that it does matter as to who is in the White House. Because yes, while the bilateral relationship does enjoy that bipartisanship support that we talk about in the U.S. Congress, but the way Donald Trump has actually gone back on international agreements, be it on climate change, be it on the Iran nuclear agreement, these all do have serious repercussions for countries like India. And if Donald Trump continues, of course, he's brought in a certain level of clarity on relations with China. But it was very interesting, something that Ashley Tellis, the noted strategic expert, pointed to the other day in a webinar where he said that one of the reasons why, if you see the difference in tone and tenor when, the quadrilateral meeting happens, India never names China despite whatever is playing out at the line of actual control. That's because China will still continue to play an important role in your economy, especially in this post-pandemic world. And you cannot be shutting doors upon China immediately overnight. While the U.S. belligerents also, you talk about Chinese belligerents, there is also an U.S. belligerence. There is also U.S. aggression. That could end up badly for India. That could, create a lot of pressure for India. So Pompeo can go ahead and, abuse China, name call it, but India will not even name China in its bilateral or its multilateral statement. So I think, of course, the relationship is not about a zero-sum game. All these broad jigsaw pieces of a puzzle, they need to fit in for, of course, things to shape up. But tonight, I just want to end by saying, Tanvi, that I'm sure you'll have more opportunities to discuss the Indo-US ties in the days ahead. Tonight, it's really about what the American voters want, who they vote for. I mean, here in the liberals in India have been hoping that perhaps if Kamala Harris becomes the first woman, the first Afro-American, first Indian-American vice president, that maybe she will be a little more vocal on issues which are politically contentious in India, be it on issues like CA, NRC, or Kashmir. But is it going to happen? Not really. You may govern in prose, but when you are in power, you do things differently. So even when Barack Obama was in New Delhi here with Narendra Modi, it's not like he went around carrying a big stick against the Modi government. But there were things where, you say things in public and you prod gently in private. So these approaches are different. These toner and tenors could be different between a Trump and, of course, a Joe Biden. But we'll have to see what the Americans really choose tonight. And if Biden, in a way, miscalculated, and the two things that could backfire is by not doing rallies at all, by actually holding on to virtual rallies, did he manage to not enthuse his crowds or the new voters maybe? And secondly, what was supposed to be a referendum on Trump's mismanagement of COVID, has Trump managed to turn that around by saying that, look, now it's actually about the economic options. And if Biden comes in, then he's going to go in for a further lockdown and create more economic pressures.
Okay.
So the odds of American pundits and pollsters getting the poll figures wrong for two consecutive elections are really less. I would like to say that it perhaps shouldn't be the case. When I would know better, he would understand political arithmetic better. But then who knows? There's always a slip between the cup and the lip.
Yes. Well, like you said, I would agree with you. Tonight is about what the people of America want, and one can only hope that whichever way the majority their votes is actually what they end up getting, and the popular vote gets reflected elsewhere as well.
Just one last point. Very quickly, I just wanted to say it's an important reminder. I think if Donald Trump comes out on third night, on fourth early morning, and announces that he has won the elections, it's not going to be the final decision. Let's wait for organizations like Associated Press to actually call the race and announce the results before we accept the results.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I think when it comes to President Donald Trump, over the years, we have learned to slowly process it and not really jump to conclusions basis what he says. But Pramit Paul Chaudhary, very quickly, to you as well, would it be right to say that at least if Joe Biden is in the White House, perhaps US's policy towards India would be a little more predictable.
Quite probably true. Trump, whatever else about him, he's not very predictable. The Trump administration has functioned, if you wish, on two levels. You have the officials, the ministers have functioned actually in a relatively stable manner, and they have pushed the relationship forward on a large number of fronts, especially on the defense and security side. President Trump obviously moves on a slightly more whimsical manner. So even on China, for example, while his government has taken a pretty hard line on China on a number of fronts, Trump has sort of gone back and forth a little because he keeps hoping to get this big trade deal with China. Biden definitely will function like a traditional American president and administration. It'll be a little slower and maybe in many things, a little less radical in breaking agreements and so on. Sometimes that works in our favor, sometimes it doesn't. But yes, Biden is much more traditional, and I think he will resemble very closely the second Obama administration, partly because he's absorbing a lot of the people from that administration. But I think it's very clear that for Biden, the biggest multilateral issue, which he wants to work very closely with India, his team has already reached out to us on that front, is climate. Climate is very much his number one multilateral concern. I don't see him going back on any of the defense understandings we have with him, but his core foreign policy advisors, going by their own statements and speeches, indicate that they would prefer to confront China economically and technologically, and not so much on the military front, partly because they want to cut defense expenditure. And one area I think we should expect, especially if the Democrats will definitely hold on to the House of Representatives, but if they're also able to capture the Senate, we should also hope to have some easing on the immigration side, something Indians are very interested in, has not been something that Trump has necessarily been supportive of.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And, thank you for really breaking it down across those categories for us. And I'm afraid we are completely out of time, but I must say this has been an extremely, we couldn't have had a better panel.
Yeah, I'm just hoping the US election results come out before the Bihar does. Once do, and of course, certainly before Diwali.
Yes, and of course, I'm hoping, all of you are back with us in the next few days to have conversations about what happens next. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. Just a very quick bit of information for our viewers, because I personally found it very interesting. The first two towns to go to vote were part of New Hampshire, and they actually held their vote at the stroke of midnight. And then shortly after that, the results were announced. And here is why. Because one of the towns is so small that their eligible voters are only 5. And that's Dixville Notch. And in Dixville Notch in New Hampshire, all 5 voters cast their vote for Joe Biden. And then the second one was Millsfield, about, just close by, again in New Hampshire itself, where Donald Trump got 16 votes to Joe Biden's 5. But that's how small it can get in United States. 5 voters in one town. Their results have already been announced, while in other parts of United States, people are just waking up, getting ready to go out and cast their vote. It's been a pleasure to have all of you on this conversation. Thank you for joining us.